Clubhouse session number 2. Last week we did a session with our artist Irene Hoff. This week we decided that we might do a Q&A just to answer some of these questions that I've come across, with some of the buyers in Singapore who are just starting on their new collection or are new to collecting as a whole. So yeah, before we begin, maybe I'll just let everyone know that this session will be recorded. We are still in the stage of generating more content, and at this point, all recorded Clubhouse sessions will be uploaded onto YouTube as a podcast of sorts. So, okay, great. Let's start. Today, I think why I started to do this Q&A session is because most of the buyers, either first-timers or seasoned buyers, have repeatedly asked the same few questions. And, I thought I consolidated 10 of the most common questions that have been asked to me. And they would actually, come across at different points of the process of buying something. So I think it's good. Let's start off with the questions, and towards the end, I could find some way to kind of consolidate some of the key points and pointers about starting your art collection. So, all right, at any time, if you have any questions, someone could raise your hand in the room and I'll be happy to answer anything. All right, cool. So let's start with question number 1. I think this is probably one of the most common questions in purchasing a contemporary piece of art these days. Now, question number 1 is buying art a good investment, and what is the value of appreciation? All right, I think this question comes up more often now than ever, because everyone has a investment mindset into art purchasing as well. But I think it's consistent across everything someone buys, right? Like, you spend $1 today, you are thinking, 3 years down the road, how much would it be worth? So I think it's a valid question to ask if art buying today will lead to a good investment. I think generally art has been pretty stable in terms of its pricing, and it's always tagged against a lot of very good, reasoning or so-called pricing mechanisms against the market value. So if you were to ask me, I think not all art will represent good investment, obviously. Choosing the good art would actually result in a good investment. So at this point in time, I don't think there is a so-called ready-made recipe for anybody to determine whether an art piece or an artist will shoot up in pricing down the line. But there are a few telltale signs as to whether something would tend to appreciate down the line, or it would be something that is a bit more common and might either just lose a bit in value or actually not be worth the money you pay for. So in general, I think art in itself, you see more commonly now investment groups taking on a basket of art investment, and there is a lot of money pouring into the classic or so-called the modern grades like George Condo, or even some of the Andy Warhol screen prints. So these are coming up as auction items, and we have seen more and more groups around the world use art as a form of investment. All in all, when customers ask me that question, I always say buy what you love first, because art is something that you have to look at on a day-to-day basis. It is not like stocks, or it is not like equities where they can sit in the back of your portfolio. Art is something that you interact with on a daily basis, and even without thinking of it as an investment, you should always still love what you buy first. So that's my answer to the first question. Buy what you love. It's important that you think about art first before the investment. So that is probably one of the top few questions that I receive on a daily basis. Okay, question number 2. This is quite interesting because most people often try to look for artwork, but they actually don't have an idea in mind on who to pick. So the second most common question would actually be, how do I choose the artwork to buy? Are there any rules? Are there any guides? How do I start? The answer to that is actually quite simple. there is no right or wrong in buying your first art piece. It is once again down to your personal preference on what do you think suits you as a style. I always draw the relationship of an artwork to me personally is like a tattoo. So you try to choose something that you can relate to, be it the style, be it the technique, be it some form of humor, or there is an element of surprise or awe in the artwork that draws you to it. There is also more discovery when you try to find out what the artist is trying to say, what the artist stands for, and if it comes across in a certain range of his or her works. So there is no right or wrong answer to choose an artwork to start with. I often try to suggest a customer who is buying for the first time or collector to not think about starting a collection immediately. It is always good to think about the space that you want to put the artwork in. Look at some options. Buy your first piece. See how it sits in your house or in your office before you think about expanding the collection to the second or the third piece. Most first-time buyers or collectors make the mistake of trying to buy too many at once because there are so many options out there. And what happens is, in the end, just like anything else, some things, after they sit with you for some time, you may begin to like them, or you begin to not appreciate that piece of artwork for what it is that much. So it is good to always start small, and then see how the piece reacts within your space, and then move from there. So like most items, my suggestion is do not try to move too fast when you start collecting. Start small, start with something that is manageable, be it in terms of size, in terms of budget, and then really let it sit in a space for some time, and on a daily basis, after you interact with it, you would know how to move on from there. Right? So that's really how I think somebody should choose their artwork. Third question, one of the most common one as well, I think more apparent in the last few years, it's very simple. Prints or canvas? The question has come out quite often recently because I think I mentioned this in one of the conversations I had previously, is that what is being defined as art is getting more and more blurred in this current and modern era. So there is always a choice on whether to pay for something that you like. Say, for example, you have a certain budget that you want to work with. You are uncertain whether you should go into a print or you should go into a canvas. For me, I don't think necessarily there is one that is more precious than the other, because I always give this analogy, like some of the greatest works we have ever seen in the modern times are actually screen prints. So the same, say, X amount of dollars, you could spend it on Andy Warhol screen print, or you could get a larger size, or a series of original canvas from an emerging artist. So there is really no right or wrong, or one being more valuable than the other. Once again, it's back to the appeal of what you think works best for you and your style. I think prints recently has gained a lot of momentum because some artists who have predominantly just dealt with original canvases or sculptures are looking at prints because they gain more mileage with the collectors. And at every one time, if you do an edition of 50 or 100, you could share it with almost 50 or 100 people more than just one canvas sitting in one collector's home. It is not to say that the value or the price of it is any less. It's just that artists see it as a way to send more works to more collectors. And what it does for collectors is also a win-win situation because, for example, like a Murakami original would be in the millions of dollars, but, creating prints of editions of 50, 100, or 300 would actually allow you to buy it at about a few $1,000s. So if you truly enjoy the graphics of a particular artist, but you can't, afford the original works, sometimes prints would represent a very, very good buy in some cases. Of course, some people might argue that prints, there's a lack of technique. There is, it's just a photocopy or it's a copy. But sometimes I some science into going to produce these prints. It's not just like you create a illustration and you put it onto the printer and then it comes out. So I think in this day there is a good selection of both prints and canvas, even sometimes from the same artist. And I do suggest for first-time buyers to actually think about getting prints first to see if you truly enjoy the works of this artist, and progressively work into a small canvas and down the line to a bigger canvas from the same person. I personally, when I started collecting about 3 years ago, really bought a lot of prints because it allows me to buy into a lot of different artists at the same time, and it's interesting for me to see how one works when it is placed next to another, if it actually makes sense. So if you look at my I'll be sharing my collection sometime down the line, but it is made up about a good 60-70% of prints, which is quite interesting because many people would think that canvas are your first so-called options to go to. But once again, not trying to sit on a fence here, but there is really no right or wrong answer. But if I had to choose personally, I would say prints for now would make a lot of sense to me. Okay. Next question that comes up quite frequently as well is like first-time buyers or collectors would try to understand what are the different prints, what is the difference between a silk screen, an offset, and time edition or a numbered edition print. But more importantly, the second part to this question is why are they so expensive? So first of all, I think I can explain a bit more what prints are. In essence, they are edition works, so they are they are multiple pieces to the same artwork. Sometimes they are released in different ways. Artists would say they are going to produce 50 of them and that's it. Some artists would say they will try to produce as many that the demand for it is within a 24-hour time period. That is quite common recently. Lastly, there is something called the hand-embellished prints, which are something of a hybrid between originals and prints. In essence, hand-embellished prints are actually unique pieces that are known to be quite common and quite prevalent these days. Why they can be certain prices is, once again, I talk about it being relative to what is the next best option that you can get. For example, if an original artwork by an artist, a world-class one, is going to be $1 million, they would position their print maybe at a 4,000 to 5,000 mark, and maybe a hand-embellished print to be somewhere in the 10,000 region. So everything is very relative, right? A print by a world-class artist could sometimes cost more than an original art from an emerging or less known artist. Too expensive for a print. It's just really seen in relative to what an original one-of-one artwork would cost. So that is really my understanding of why some art pieces in the prints could get so high in price. Okay, the fifth or one of the more common questions as well is how do I choose for a space, be it my living room, dining room, top of my bed head, or a special feature wall. I mean, just to share with everyone, I am an architect by training, so I am able to give some suggestions when somebody comes in to look for a certain art piece, and whether a certain piece that they have their eyes on is actually suitable for the space. I think you have to see the artwork as an extension of the furnishing within the home. More often than not now, you see people when decorating their house would like to dedicate a space where they have nice canvases, they have some nice art toys, or there even is a room dedicated for like maybe a men's den or ladies study room or walk-in wardrobe where there are art involved. We should not see art pieces as the last decoration into the finishing of your home, but I see it as an extension of your finishings, be it your walk-in wardrobe, be it your TV console, or even as part as the top half of your couch seating in the living room. It is always important to consider that dimensions should always fit. You will not want to go for something too big for your couch and it becomes too top heavy. Neither do you want to get something too small and then it looks insignificant on the wall. So it's always good to consider concurrently when you want to do the interior design of your home together with the art pieces you think about getting. That's why we see more and more homeowners nowadays, or office business owners, they integrate the art choosing process as part of the design of the space. And I've also been approached by a few individuals, to coordinate with the architects or the interior designers to kind of get the selection correct. And then not only that, but the installation and the positioning as well. So I think when you say choose for a space, it's good to see it as an extension of the design process and not as an afterthought where you think about filling the white walls with art pieces down the line. Okay, common question number 6. Authenticity. Is it safe buying off the internet, and how do I verify? I think when it comes to this stage of the process, you are really quite fixed on a certain piece, but there is still some lingering doubt on whether some of these websites that you see online are trustworthy, and how do you go about verifying whether the money you're paying for is for the original artwork itself. I also had my doubts when I started art collecting about 2 to 3 years ago. Buying from Singapore, there weren't many good galleries out there. Even some of the pieces that you wanted to buy are not available. And when you walk into the galleries, it's often something that is either too abstract or it's something that's not really up your alley. So most of the good art pieces that maybe you'll find something interesting is off the internet. But I understand why consumers would be very afraid to buy off the internet, because there's just so much doubt, right? Firstly, whether the piece is original, is this art dealer or gallery trustworthy? Even after you start paying for the piece, will it arrive on time? Would it arrive undamaged, or would it even arrive at all? So there are a lot of good options out there, but I think it's important to do your due diligence when you buy a certain piece. So, for example, when you buy a print or original artwork, I think the misconception is art buying is something that is very unapproachable, or is something where it's like not your typical shopping for something that you want. Most misconception is gallery owners or gallery representatives are not bothered to entertain your questions, but I think that's a bit far from the truth though. I think if you present yourself as someone very interested to just know more about the artwork and with a potential to buy, I always never hesitate to just put out an email or to reach out to the gallery to ask a bit more questions. And more often than not, it is better to build that relationship, and you be able to ask for more information, even some extra photos in real life. And more often than not, it tells you more than just a description on the website. The representative might be able to give you some updates on the current condition, some corners that have maybe been damaged, or whether this art piece actually comes framed or not. So it gives you more information to be able to make a good decision. So I think the first misconception is it's an unapproachable experience. But I think just to break that myth, we should always not be afraid to buy, or even sound silly when asking the questions about purchasing something off the internet. I of course do have my doubts about just going out there and buying something. So the kind of background check I would check, of course, is who is this artist? Is this artist generally working only in his own country, or is open to the rest of the world as well? Is there such a design out there? Do the dimensions and the edition number checked out? I think these are a few good basic checks just to make sure that there is this piece out there. And it would be good to just also do some background check on the gallery or dealer that you're buying from. does the website or the gallery seems legitimate? Because I have clients who previously, before engaging with myself, purchased off eBay or some other forms of reselling websites, and more often than not, some of these would not represent to be the most safe places to buy artworks from. Not because that the sellers are have bad intentions, but sometimes these are not people who are familiar with handling art pieces, and you might not receive something in the best condition, be it through preparing the artwork for shipping or keeping it in the right spaces, for storage. So I always try to handle with people who are familiar with handling art pieces, and that makes it more transparent in the kind of deal that we try to deal with. So on the general topic of authenticity, I always think to deal with people you trust, but down the line you must also flip the script and trust the people you deal with. Do your due diligence, but always try to strike up a good relationship with authorized dealer, or better still, if there is a physical showroom or gallery to check out the works, I think it's always good to speak to the salesperson or gallery owner to have more information. Alright, question number 8. Why are gallery pricing more than some of the internet pricing? So I think this question is trying to understand why buying through some galleries, costs more than, purchasing off the internet. I have gotten this question quite often as well. Like, for me, I'm not that worried because I'm quite transparent in the kind of markup that I do for my gallery when I incur, so-called when I bring a work in, as opposed to somebody just buying off, the internet or overseas gallery. My explanation is quite straightforward. It's really because as a gallery owner or a dealer or a reseller, you are absorbing certain risks that is not obvious to the end user. Sometimes you have to take on pieces and they are not sold immediately. So that sits in your inventory, and then you, of course, have to, cover some of these overheads. But more importantly, it's because sometimes if you were to really buy an art piece on your own, what happens if, it comes with a dent? Or what happens if it comes with a tear, or a scratch mark or some other unwanted items on the piece? There is really no assurance or point of contact for you to go back and lean on. Whereas, if you deal with somebody who is physically in Singapore or has that relationship with the artist or the other dealer in the other country, there is still some ability for kind of a compensation, or there's some ways to kind of make good of the situation. So I think, like all businesses, there is always room for profit, but more importantly, it's to buying a peace of mind, which that that if something should not go as expected, there is always somebody to fall back on and to try to remedy the situation. So I don't think it's directly comparing apples to apples as to why buying physically will with maybe one gallery will cost more than buying directly on the internet. Not entirely the most accurate questions or comparisons, but I think it's just a simple so-called understanding of, just paying a slight overhead to cover some of these things for peace of mind. Alright. One of the other top 10 questions, this is question number 9. How do I take care or maintain my artwork? Do I need to spend a lot extra to take care of it? So this comes to the part where, the artwork is already in your home. What most first-time buyers are actually quite afraid of how to handle the artwork. I think more importantly, pieces that are created, in the mainstream, be it an original oil painting on the canvas, an etching or limited edition prints on paper, these would generally sit quite well in your typical home or office setting. Unless there are certain extremes that you talk about, putting it next to a swimming pool, putting it into the washroom in highly water dense area, that would poses some questions and doubts. But most artwork, should already take care of itself. And if it were prints, I would suggest placing and framing them nicely. I always tell some of the collectors that putting the right artwork in the right frame would actually give it a more distinguished look, and actually gives it more a finished look than just leaving it raw. So and there are some science behind, or technical aspects, as to how you can look out for the best framing techniques for your artwork. It is good to once again speak to more experienced buyers, or with dealers who can recommend you certain situations. For example, in Singapore, we are quite humid and hot, and we get sun all year round. So we always try to handle some of these prints with UV protected glass, and we always advise clients to not put it under the air conditioning or close to the balcony where it is exposed to direct sunlight or high amount of water at all time. For original paintings, like say oil painting on canvases, these are fairly low maintenance. Having them in the right position and under the right lighting would give it a good look, but there's really not much that you need to worry about, unless, once again, you're placing one of these canvases in the kitchen or in the yard, where I would not recommend. So it all boils down to positioning, and then setting it up right from the start, so that you don't have to think about reframing it down the line again. There are some cases where collectors who are very precise about how they want to collect do reframe some of these pieces or their artworks in a 5 to 7 year cycle. So it's not uncommon to see art collectors who, after 7 years, take all of their prints out from the frames and reframe it again, just to reduce the amount of build-up within the frame of carbon dioxide or anything that could lean towards any decolorization of the prints. Okay, so I think art in all, unless it's something that is super fragile or has been around for about a good 70 or 80 years and above, everything that is pretty contemporary would take you quite a long while before you need to think about preserving the artwork. Okay, question number 10, reselling. So this question is from, what are my reselling avenues, and will I lose much money? Is it a good time to sell? How would I know? I think this ties back into the whole question again about this very investment mindset with some of the more current collectors coming into the game. It is not wrong to think about how much it would be in a few years' time, but I think reselling always should be a second thought. But of course, if you hold on to something that is more recognizable by the crowd or the collectors, then obviously it makes it easier for you to resell. I've known of certain collectors who prefer getting something more renowned, and at the same price point for something, something that is probably larger or more delicate or more precise in drawing, because they think that they might fall out of love with this art piece in a few years' time, and it's common that they get something that they are more confident in, selling off down the line, just to refresh their collection. So I think thinking about reselling is never wrong. There are many avenues to resell it now. For example, like a gallery like myself would be able to take on certain pieces that we're confident to sell for clients on consignment, or we buy them over and then we move them into the next owner's hands. That gives us an opportunity to help this first client update his own collection, and maybe find something he loves again, he or she loves again down the line. So reselling, to me, is always a secondary thought for my personal collection. But I would say that it's not uncommon that people see art as an investment, and it's just to keep on to something. Hopefully it appreciates in price, but in the meantime they get to enjoy it in their home. that is being more common now, as drawing comparisons to owning a luxury watch piece, holding on to good wine. I think this spirit of collecting is consistent across some of these items. It's just that art is something more visual, and you get to see them more apparently in your home. Okay, so I think that is probably 10 of the more common questions put across to me on a daily basis with my interactions of collectors, be it first timers or more seasoned ones. I took a look at these questions, and I managed to think about a summary of what they are. Essentially, they revolve around the whole process, right? It goes from selection to then thinking about budget and style. That's where you start thinking whether you should go for a print or a canvas, and where it would fit into your home. The next question, quite correctly, would be, who do I buy it from? This is where you start thinking about your options, be it from the internet, be it from resellers, or be it from direct owners who have owned them before but looking to move off them. So actually, it's quite linked. In the questions that have been brought up are all quite revolved around the whole process, from selection to budgeting and styling to the vendors you get it from, authentication in terms of quality, in terms of provenance, and its background check, and also authentication in terms of value and where this art piece would be in a couple of years time, to all the way to the last so-called step of the resale and expansion your collection process, where you potentially might want to move off some pieces or buy an extra few pieces to complement the one that you have. That's where you also consider some things like maintenance. And quite nicely, you actually start over the process again, back to the selection. So I think I will share maybe like a short flow chart of sorts to some of these common steps in terms of acquiring art pieces or be it expanding your collection. But I think there are some real questions that have been put across. But I'd just like to leave everyone with three very simple pointers that kind of summarize my answers to most of the people who pose these questions to me. Number one, always buy what you love. You might not end up loving what you buy in 3 years' time, but you should always make it a point to buy something not for, if not for anything else, you must love the artwork that you're buying. I think that's important because it is an enjoyment to see the art piece on a daily basis. And if you don't even enjoy looking at it, or appreciating the technique and style that goes behind it, then perhaps buying it for the wrong reasons. So number one, always buy what you love. Number two, I brought this up earlier, deal with who you trust, but also as you build that relationship, trust who you deal with. Art is as much as collecting as about relationship building. I have repeated clients who come back because there's a sense of trust in terms of the pricing that is being sensible, but also having the eye to recommend something that will fit nicely into their collection or is worth their time and money to invest into. So don't think about art as just a one-time purchase. It should be seen as a slow and steady relationship building process. So it's as important about finding the right art pieces, but also finding the right art dealers that you could really trust and rely upon in your journey of collecting as well. The last tip I would like to give is I coined it quite colloquially as art first, investment second. You should always think about art as the work of beauty, or the work of surprise, or that the kind of works and hours the artist put behind it first. Appreciate it for what it is rather than an investment vessel. More often than not, you will be caught up in making a decision that you might not be 100% happy with, because you're thinking too much about the money aspects of it, or some kind of reselling that down the line. I'm not saying that just because you love something, you should go for it 100% if it doesn't make sense to you on a financial basis, or if it doesn't work for you if you have space constraints. It's just that you should always appreciate it as a piece of art first before as something that could make you money, or you will not lose as much money down the line. I think that more often than not will corrupt or um, affect the way you think about certain things, and that should not be your first considerations. So I'm just going to repeat it again. Number one, buy what you love. Number two, deal with who you trust with who you deal with. And thirdly, think of it as art first, investment second. All right. I hope this has been quite a good, just quick summary of some of the common questions and doubts most of the first time collectors or seasoned collectors in Singapore have. And I'm happy to share more if you guys would leave a comment, or once this recording has been uploaded onto YouTube. Happy to share your questions. And if there's anything that I have come across and able to give some insight on, I'll be happy to share with you guys. All right. So we are doing our Clubhouse sessions once in every 2 weeks. We'll alternate it between a Q&A and possibly with a conversation with an artist. So stay tuned for us in about 2 weeks' time, where we will speak to one of our artists that we work with again. And, maybe we could bring up some of these questions again, or we could reflect on some of those that have been brought up along the way. All right. I wish everyone a good evening, and thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.